course, that song means. We're joined by our book reviewer, Wayne Button. Good morning.
Good morning, Janice. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. You?
Not bad. Back to work, but still trying to find time to read books for you guys.
Well, we really appreciate that, Wayne. And we know that you are on a nonfiction roll right now. You've read 3 nonfiction books in a row. This week, you picked The Inconvenient Indian, which was the CBC Canada Reads pick from 2015. And we actually have a clip from the author Thomas King. Now, that's back in the spring of 2015 when Stephen Harper was still Prime Minister of Canada.
It took me about 6 years, I guess, to actually do the writing, and probably most of my lifetime for the rest of the stuff. But one of the things that I didn't realize to the extent that I wrote in the book is that these patterns, these large patterns, have just been repeating themselves. We haven't gotten any smarter. We haven't learned anything. What happened in the 1800s and in the 1950s, we're repeating right today, this very day, with the Harper government and many of the pieces of legislation that they've brought out. So we haven't learned anything.
I wonder if Thomas King would think things have changed a bit now, 5 years later. Wayne, can you tell us a little bit about the book that Thomas King wrote?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing book. I tell people if there's one book they're going to read on, Native history, this is it. Because most history books sometimes can be boring, but this is actually, at times, even comical. He makes you laugh out loud and gives some amazing stories, but explains things extremely well and thorough. In fact, he even starts off the book talking about the title, and he struggled with the title for a long time. And his wife is actually an historian, and his son at the time, was studying a master's in history, and both of them told him, don't put history in the title of the book, because if you put history in the title of the book, you're going to have footnotes and you're going to have references, and it has to be completely historically accurate as opposed to more of an opinion piece. So I'm glad he didn't do that, because he made the book extremely interesting, covering everything about not just Canadian, but USA, the whole North American Native history, going anywhere from topics involving movie culture and Native people to land trees, right up to all the massacres that occurred. He explains everything in great detail, but as I say, in a very non-boring, analytical way, and makes it extremely interesting. It's so good that I actually posted this on social media yesterday, and someone wrote me and said that she had to read it for her Native law class in law school. So it was actually a must-read that the students had to do. So, yeah, I got to say, it's a great book. He makes it extremely interesting, and you can understand why it took him 6 years to write it.
Why did you choose to read this book?
I mean, a couple of reasons. This kept popping up. A lot of political podcasts I listen to, they recommended this book. Sometimes online I'll look for different books in terms of lists, like what's the top 10 scariest books or something like that. And I kept looking at, what are the top 10, books to read about Native culture. And this kept coming up. And then I seen that it won some awards, and you guys even had it in Canada Reads. So I said, well, maybe this is a book for me to read. So I bought it. But I wanted to read it this week, particularly because I try to read some things for you guys, related to the times, and Sunday is actually Aboriginal People Day, so I figured to commemorate that, I wanted to read something related to Native culture, so I figured this week was as good as any to read it.
Absolutely. Now, there were a lot of anecdotes, I understand, in the book. Were there any that stuck with you?
Yeah, the funniest one that stuck with me is he said he was living in New Zealand on a 1-month work term, and he actually ended up staying for over a year. So immigration called him and was like, you're overstaying, your work visa. And he said, well, I like New Zealand. I think I'm going to stay for a while if you guys let me. So he said, okay, well, let's see if we can renew your visa. So he said, give me some statistics. So he asked for his age, his date, his weight, stuff like that. And then he said that he was Indian. And the guy said, well, we can't really, let you in New Zealand if you're an Indian. He said, why is that? He said, well, we get thousands and thousands and thousands of visa applications from Indians every year. So he said he's sitting there and he's thinking, he's like, really? Like, I know there's lots of Indians in North America, but, like, they're all trying to come to New Zealand. This doesn't make any sense. He goes, where are these Indians that you're referring to? He said, New Delhi. And he said, no, I'm not that type of Indian. I'm from North America. I'm a North American Indian. And then the immigration officer said, oh, you mean like cowboy Indians? And he said, yeah, I mean like cowboy Indians. So,
wow.
yeah, so it was a funny story. Like, he doesn't get upset over those things. He adds humor to it. As he said in the interview with you guys a couple of years ago, he said that's all he can do sometimes at some of these things is just laugh.
So who would you recommend read this book, Wayne?
Anybody really who wants to, learn more about Native culture and Native history, this is probably the top of the list of one that I'd recommend to them. Like I said, anybody may be interested in law school, because he does do a chapter on land treaties, and he dumbs it down really well to explain how land treaties and such work. So anybody like that, I would strongly recommend this book to.
Well, we really appreciate you telling us more about it this morning. Thank you.
No problem, Janice. You have a good week.
You as well. And that's this week's book suggestion from Wayne Button. It's The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. Well, if you are taking a staycation, maybe you're going to be watching some TV. We have our TV reviewer here now, Wayne Walsh. Good morning.
Good morning, Janice. How are you?
I'm not too bad. This week you are also suggesting something that could open people's eyes to a reality that may not be aware of, and it's an acclaimed documentary called 13. Now, it was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature at the 89th Academy Awards, and it won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction. And I understand it shines a light on race and incarceration in the States. Here's a clip about it.
In the Central Park jogger case, they put 5 innocent teens in prison because the public pressure to lock up these quote-unquote animals was so strong.
You better believe that I hate the people that took this girl and raped her brutally. You better believe it.
Donald Trump wanted to give these kids a death penalty, and he took out a full-page ad to put the pressure on. These children, 4 of them under 18, all went to adult prisons for 6 to 11 years before DNA evidence proved they were all innocent.
We make them their crime. That's how we introduce them. Well, that's a rapist, that's a murderer, that's a robber, that's a sex offender, that's a burglar, that's a gang leader. And through that lens, it becomes so much easier to accept that they're guilty and that they should go to prison.
Now, when you watched that documentary 13, what did you learn from it?
Well, it was a little decision after everything is on the go currently in the States, and we're just in Labrador, where a lot of people consider it like a little bubble. So I tried to dive in a little bit and try and understand why all this is occurring in the States. And this documentary, which I thought when I started watching it just came out because it would be, particular for the times, but this documentary came out in 2016. So the idea that I just watched a movie that's pretty much 4 years old, and it still relates to today and everything that's ongoing, and the Black Lives Matters movement and all those things that we're watching on TV, but are not exactly close to. So it's hard to understand exactly what's happening. And I see a lot of people that are just taking it for what they see and not actually looking into finding out, is there any actual merit behind all this? And the movie 13, from start to finish, you're just watching it almost thinking, wow, this happened in the freest country in the world, as they say. And it was just a piece that I had to get into to try and expand my little knowledge on big events in the States and how it came to be.
Now, you were obviously surprised and shocked by some of the things that you saw in the documentary. What resonated with you most?
Well, it's a really different take on how the 13th, by the way, is focused on the 13th Amendment to the state's constitution, in which they freed the slaves, and it was adopted in 1865. But what you don't see is that once the free labor of slavery ended, there's 2 sides that they show in this show. That one, the white people didn't have anyone to work for free labor, and 2, once they were free, there was a whole lot of people that didn't have any work, didn't have any skills, and they were on their own, and now they had to start doing it on their own. So what you find out is that even though slavery ended, they kind of just renamed it, and they started using crime as a way to take away the rights of these recently freed black people. And it starts from back in 1865 and goes from using, once they had people arrested in crime, they were putting them to work. Again, for, no pay, no real good conditions being in the law. And as you move forward in the years, you can see that they get away from being pretty much the racist side of it to calling it the separation movement, where you see on TV that it goes from, blacks in the back of the bus, whites to the front, different bathrooms, different this. And then it goes up to the Jim Crow, who's a famous name for being a really writing Jim Crow laws in terms of racism in the States. And, you'll see little things that we see on the news now, such as all these statues and memorials of Confederates being tore down in the States, to everybody looking at this and saying, well, this is history, but they didn't do this when the wars were over. They did this in the 60s and 70s to, strike fear and bring that kind of mentality around these areas for this Jim Crow. And as it moves on into the future, you'll see from where Kaepernick takes a knee, which is a peaceful protest, to Selma, to some big events that happened in the state. But it's just a different look at seeing how slavery turned to criminalization, which turned to segregation, which then turned into just different titles for how it is. And you can see it now as you watch how they got to the place they did now. So as far as an entertaining film goes, it's just very informative. It did a great job of trying to make you understand what's happening even in the world today, even though the movie came out 4 years ago. The problems still haven't been changed. So when people see all these protesters being out in the streets with a pandemic ongoing, you're kind of thinking, why would they put themselves in this position? But the movie, for putting away an hour and a half of your life to just get a little bit of education, I'm sure it goes very deep and everything else, there's more detail to it, but it's a very, very good film that I would suggest for anyone to watch before they start commenting on things they think they see or things they might know, because this is a long-running topic that this documentary puts to light. And it's on Netflix, and Netflix usually make great shows, and they didn't disappoint on this one.
Well, it sounds like it's a documentary worth watching. Thanks so much for telling us about it, Wayne.
You're welcome. I just want to bring a bit of attention to it myself. Like I say, we live in a small area, but it's things that happen around us every day, and sometimes it's just good to open our eyes and take in a little bit of culture that's happening, even though it might not be the best. It's better to be informed than just judge, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And that's Wayne Walsh, and he is suggesting that we all watch the documentary 13th on Netflix.